but you don't want to create this thing that is overwhelming. You don't want to create something with every little aspect of the test. You don't want to create too many columns where people are like feeling like it's overwhelming to look at it.
Hi, my name is Nick Phipps and I'm head of CRO at IDHL, a digital agency based in the UK. I'm your host for this episode of the Experimentation podcast. On today's episode, we have Nick Murphy, who shares his thoughts, tips, and advice on how and why you should build a learning library. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Experimentation. I'm your host today, Nick Phipps, head of CRO at IDHL based in the UK. And today we are going to be talking about the importance of learning and building learning libraries with our special guest, another Nick Murphy, Senior Research and Experimentation Lead at Further. Hey Nick.
Hey Nick. Yeah, it's fun to talk to another Nick. Do you ever go by Nicholas? Are you a Nicholas?
Only to my nan.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm like approaching a new group of people, I'm like, am I going to go by Nicholas now? It sounds so much smarter.
It's like formal, I'm educated, I'm Nicholas.
Yeah. My gym teacher used to call me Nick at Night. Are you familiar with that show? It's
No.
like Nickelodeon at night when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like, Are You Afraid of the Dark was one of the big shows. But yeah, so I am currently at Further. I've been working with about 30 different clients in the past 2.5 years. I have a digital analytics background. I've set up analytics before, done a lot of analytics analyses, but I found out about experimentation as analysts, kind of that becomes part of our job as the role has kind of changed in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And experimentation is just so much more fun than analytics. So I've really, really liked doing it. And working with so many different clients, I think I've seen a lot of different ways that they have kind of approached like the value of what experimentation is, and kind of the value that people get out is usually like revenue gained, revenue saved. Those are calculable, right? Easy to quantify. Well, somewhat easy. And then there's learnings. I feel like learnings are kind of just this nebulous thing, and people don't talk about it as much. Simon Giardin did a previous episode here and really talked about learnings, which I thought was nice. But I think I just want to talk today like more about learnings and kind of how we can help the industry approach learnings in maybe a little bit of a different way.
Love it. Sounds good. Yeah, I think you said before we got started that learning is an art as opposed to a science. So I'm excited to unpack that a little more. And I think let's let me just give you the opportunity then to kind of take a step back and just explain to the guys that are listening, what is it that you actually mean by learning? What do you see as the kind of the problem that exists out there, and what are you trying with this talk to kind of educate people about?
Yeah, so learning, there's kind of few problems I see in the industry right now, and one of the main ones is that learning is intangible, so it's definitely more of an art than a science. So you set up your hypothesis statement in the start, and you end up with your analysis, but what happens in between is kind of like linking the treatment and the output of the test, and you kind of just use your prior knowledge to understand what actually changed. So that's kind of one of the things going on here. Another problem I see is that the industry is really focused on quick wins right now. A lot of people don't post about this on LinkedIn, but when you're in the conversations that happen, organically, this is what people are talking about. They're like, we want the low hanging fruit, the quick wins. We want
All
a
those dirty
10x.
words.
Yeah. And you don't really hear like, hey, I really want to learn from experimentation. I want to understand my audience, why they buy, why they don't buy. It's like we want to we want to make number go up at any expense. Like
Yeah,
that's what we're focused on.
it's kind of it's really something that we push from our side as CROs, isn't it? It's one of the intangible benefits of what we do, and that's what we're telling our clients. Like, oh, just because that test lost, here's some learnings, and it's coming from our side as opposed to being really driven by or understood by clients or kind of in-house teams.
Yeah. Yeah, so we really owe it to our clients, and if you're in-house, to the companies you're working with, to be honest and really do the work up front to create the learnings you want. I think that CRO, we do have this position where if we launch this test that is less than good and we get results that are either negative or inconclusive, we can just say, it's okay because we test to learn. Like, I am all about that, like learning. But when you're using learning as like a coping mechanism, that's when I start to have a problem. You really got to set yourself up for the best chance at learning. And there's a few ways we can do that too.
Cool. So we mentioned it in the intro, but I guess today we're talking about this learning library, right? So a repository of learnings and insights. Um, what exactly do you mean by the term learning library, and kind of just unpack that kind of naming convention a little?
This is Romo Santiago from experimentation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, learning library is one of my favorite things going on right now that I'm working on, and it's a tough one. Um, I think a lot of people have seen Ruben DeBoer has a big class about how to develop a learning library in
Yeah.
Airtable. I think my value that I hope we can talk about and we will talk about today is more of like how you actually use that and what you can get out of it, how you customize it. Ruben does an excellent job like setting up like how you use it. Um, but yeah, what I mean by that, so most people are familiar with the concept of a hypothesis library. So it's this document where you're working with your stakeholders, you are putting everything in that if then because format or something similar, and you want to have as many hypotheses as you can, and you want to like link where they are on the website, the KPI you're attacking, that sort of thing, and you want to prioritize. Everyone has their prioritization frameworks, their uh, different rice pie, all those fun things. But
Mhm.
after that happens, I think, and I think some other people think as well, is that when a test is completed or prioritized in the hypothesis library, it should end up in the learning library. And my take on the learning library is it really should be something that can be shared company wide. Marketing should understand it, sales should understand it. Of course, we in CR should understand it. Any aspect of the business should be able to open up the learning library, understand the progress you've made, what you've learned about with your different customer segments, different techniques that they should try, techniques that they should probably avoid. So really the learning library is this, it's providing you light kind of like when we start out in testing, or companies that don't test, first of all, they're operating using gut feelings, what they think is going to work. They're in like kind of like a dark room, right? They can't see the customer. They're like, I don't know, we're just going to do stuff that seems good. And then when you start doing testing and research, you get kind of a little bit of a flashlight. You can see a little bit in the room what's going on. And then the learning library really helps you kind of orient all these different flashlights in the room so you can see like the different avenues that are ways forward. There's different ways to create a learning library. Um, but I think that overall, the learning library is extremely essential. And if you're not creating it, you're kind of doing a disservice to yourself as you're not able to tap into this sort of second brain that you've created. You're just relying on your memory to think about the research you've done in the past, the research others have done in the past. You're relying on remembering what the interesting segments were in hundreds of tests. And it puts you in a spot that's not as effective as it could be. You're not seeing these different insights that you can with the learning library.
Yeah, and you touched on a really nice point there, which was about the kind of access and understanding that the rest of the business has to this document. Because I think, in my experience, we create these spreadsheets, like documents in Notion, wherever they're held. We create these things that we as a CRO team may understand. And we're able to share them on screen and talk through them with a client or with a colleague. But if you were to just send that to somebody, there's no way that they're going to be able to kind of decipher that.
Yep.
Um, So I know you're going to kind of get into the nuts and bolts around what's included in this library, how it's kind of laid out a little bit later. But I just think it's really important to understand that this thing that you're talking about, this kind of living, breathing library, is important for not only us and what we do day to day in experimentation, but actually could lead to a new marketing campaign,
Yep.
could lead to an internal business change. Like there's value to be had that spreads within the company, right?
Exactly. And we're trying to create this repository too for all the different company, like you mentioned, everyone in the different company, different areas of the company. Um, but you don't want to create this thing that is overwhelming. You don't want to create something with every little aspect of the test. You don't want to create too many columns where people are like feeling like it's overwhelming to look at it. Um, you don't want to just create a link to a bunch of analyses. Like this is what I see with clients that are testing and they're starting to get it, but then you see their repository of what they've run and it's just this spreadsheet and it says like test name, they've got variant A and variant B's conversion rate, the winner, they've got the stakeholder who's involved, the date it was run, and then there's a link to the analysis slides. And it's like it looks beautiful. You're like, wow, look at the work we've done. There's so much quantity here. Um, and it feels like you've done this thing and you've actually just created something that looks nice that no one is ever going to use. So I kind of take the approach of like thinking about the retrieval method. What is the way people are going to open this document and try and take insights out of it? And I think it should basically be this document where it's at a high level where you can look at it. You don't have to click on anything else. And it's kind of there to like just you can see it. There's no jargon, plain language being used. And you really take like I think it's Mary Kondo. What's her name? The clean
Yeah,
out your
I think
closet.
it's Marie Kondo. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's like that. Like if you don't love a column, get rid of it. Because like if you don't love it, like chances are other stakeholders are probably not going to see a benefit of it. Um, will they? Should you include like stuff that you aren't interested in? No, the stuff that I think should be added. And I'm still working on this too. Um, what I want to be in the learning library, but right now I have it as test name, simple enough. Should be something that anyone can understand. And we get this wrong sometimes too, though. I get this wrong. I was just fixing this yesterday. The test name, I'll put, you know, funnel. Maybe the test name is like Globe V2 remove carrier. And it's like, what on earth does that mean? So it's kind of like trying to make the test name something that describe the change. You have your test name, then you have the description of what was actually changed. Make it short and brief. People are not going to read your long description of what it is. Then maybe you add in the KPI that you're trying to increase, your primary KPI, what the result was, very in just a percent format. Then you put the simple result of what was changed. So was it a save? Was it a win? Was it inconclusive? The page it was on, the learn, and this is really the part where I think is the art part of things, is you have the learning that's broad. So you start out with this learning that is a broad application of what you just tested. So an example of this could be if you've run a test where you're reducing the amount of options available, and you find out that reducing the number of options available decrease conversion rates. Your learning that's broad could be users prefer many options. Like maybe it's a more analytical decision. They want more things to see. And then the learning that's specific is the next column. So you've got the broad learning where it is a little more of a speculation. And these, you should speculate a little bit because we're not trying to be 100% sure of why a test had the effect that it did. You're never going to know.
no,
You're just making your best guess based off the research you did up front, based off the parameters of the test, and based off the output of the test. That can all affect the strength of the learning you're getting. But with this broad learning, you're being a little bit speculative. Why do you think it worked at a high level? If you're sharing this with an executive and want them to see like 10 words, what is it? And then The specific learning, so going back to our example, maybe it's you add just a little bit more color. Users, when users saw 10 options versus 4 options, they had a decrease in, or they had an increase in conversion, because reducing the amount of options available was not as effective. So you're just adding a little bit more information, and then you go even deeper, where you actually link the analysis slides you used. And actually, what goes in analysis slides is a whole different topic. But again, using this approach of what metrics did you plan to see changed from the get-go, not just going on a fishing trip with every metric in the book and seeing anything that changed, um, that sort of thing. And just to quickly wrap that up, is the other columns would be year that it was launched, quarter it was launched. One that I'm using right now is whether the change was in the funnel or not in the funnel. So you're able to see, was the change made on a landing page, a home page, or is it in this like funnel area? And you kind of start to get an idea of like where a test's working. So I'll stop there, and curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it's really nice to kind of think about those fields that sit in there. And I know you did a LinkedIn post earlier this year, I think, didn't you, explaining some of that. So I'm sure if people want to kind of see that, they can find you on LinkedIn. But I think the bit I want to kind of focus a little more on is those 2 columns at the end. Obviously, that's the kind of main crux of what this document is there to is there for. So broad learning, specific learning. Are you trying to then take those 2 columns and start maybe theming ideas together? Is there something that you'll do with this next, or is it a case of this repository is going to keep growing, and maybe I'm looking at something that's in the funnel, as you say, and I just filter by tests that were in the funnel, and then I start looking through my learnings? Like how in a practical sense are you using this, and how do you expect others to?
Yeah. No, there's so many ways to use it. That's why it's, once you get this stuff in this documentation, is a pain in the butt. Like there's no way around it. Like you run a
Uh-huh.
test, you get the dopamine hit, you're like, I'm done with this crap. Like let's keep doing something else.
Yeah.
But once you put it all in this rigid structure, it starts to unlock all these different ways to use it that and a few that I've thought have been really helpful are, if I'm running a test now on the product, maybe like the PDP page or in the cart, I can like weed out just down to those results, and I can see the learnings up front. I can see what's worked on those pages, what hasn't worked at a really high level. And what I like to do as well is, when I'm doing my test analyses, I add in all the previous learnings we've had, and then I add in the new learning we just created underneath that. And then it starts to create this really like a different picture, where your test analyses really start to feel like you're developing that POV, that point of view on the customer. So it really just, it gives you easy access to other learnings that are in the same area. It also helps you with ideation, because you and I both know, working with clients, you'll be having brainstorming meetings and people will say, maybe we should try X idea. And you go, actually, we tried X idea in 2022 5 different times and we didn't see anything there. Can you like help me understand what you're thinking a little bit more there? It gives you like a really quick way to recall what the learning was too, because people will, I've tried to run rerun tests before, and people will say, we ran that test before and we didn't see the results that we think warranted it. And you actually pull that back up and you say, well, actually, what we saw was X, Y, and Z. So that's super helpful. Another really interesting way to use this, and this is when you start adding in more columns to the learning library, you start to see stuff like, are we winning more often? And this is the whole thing. I really like this idea of like testing to learn, and then you learn to win. So learning comes first, but then you learn to like win with your tests. But with this documentation, you start to understand, okay, what methods of research are driving winning tests? What types of stakeholders drive winning tests? And um, again, like what areas of the website are we seeing that we win most often with? And we've seen a 3x increase in win rates in the funnel with one of the clients we work with. So we now know, like, hey, I know, like, Tim, like, you're super excited about this test on the homepage, but we've tried all these different applications to try and address like fears, uncertainties, and doubts and that sort of thing, but we have not seen anything happen there. I think we should be spending more time in the funnel and continue to kind of drive and chart our course there.
Nice. Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess just to go back a little bit, you touched on earlier about documentation. The nemesis of experimenters, but a necessary evil, right? Do you see this document as another thing we've now got to keep updating, or do you think that it can maybe replace some of the other documents that we're using?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I was sweating over my learning library yesterday, and I spent about 2 hours in it trying to update everything. It is difficult, but what it ends up showing is it shows so much of the progress you're making. It gives you so many different views to look at. And again, I think the hard part, Nick, is like we see that the industry mostly wants quick wins and revenue generated. So you're kind of creating this thing knowing it's the greens or the vegetables that the client needs, your stakeholders need, but no one's going to say like, "Hey Nick, can you please update the learning library? I'm dying to see what's in it." So it's kind of, you're building this off the back of knowing it's going to help you build that culture of experimentation. It is, but to back to your question, it is difficult. So the Airtable version is nice because it's free. You can watch Ruben's course for free as well. But then after a test, you have to update all these fields. And then if you forget after a test, then you're updating 2 tests. You forget again, then you're like, man, what was the learning on that? Isn't this the whole reason we're creating this? But yeah, it does become, I hate to call it another thing, but it's almost required. It's like when a police officer pulls someone over, like they got to write their documentation of what happened. They don't like doing that, but they've got to. So
Part of the job, right? Yeah.
yeah,
And I suppose like the bigger this thing becomes, and the more learnings that are in there, the more useful it is outside of, and maybe one day you get to a point where people are asking, hey, can you update the learning library, because they're starting to see it paying off, and they're learning from the tests you're running, applying those to other areas of the business as well as experimentation. So you should eventually, further down the line, it will start kind of paying back too, right?
yeah.
And so with that in mind, it feels like ownership of that document belongs to the CRO team, the program manager. Who do you think owns that? And have you got any tips on kind of maintaining it?
Yeah. So the way that we're using it right now is the CRO has the task of updating it. They are in charge of updating it, and that should happen. I'm working on a checklist now to kind of include that as like the final step of a test analysis. Like you do your analysis, look at all the segments, input it in the learning library. That should be on your list too. But the way that we currently use it to kind of build usage of it is we'll share it in client meetings. Like you were saying earlier, the benefits you see as like we've seen a 1.5x increase in test iterations. So that's a really cool stat to kind of build the desire for people to want to see this. But we send it out in our status emails. So we'll say like, thanks all for like talking today. Here's a link to the hypothesis library, the learning library, and the test intake form. So if you have any like ideas, throw them in there. But we create a view that's pared down for the client. So it's not as many rows, but they're able to use it. And we send it out to a large list of people. And I know that's not the best way probably to build usage of it, but it creates this opportunity where people can open it. It's easy for them to share like the progress they've made doing this extra task that sometimes is just another thing on a company's list. So it does do a good job of starting to build awareness of your program.
Cool. And I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but let's say we've all gone away, created our learning libraries. We're all praising you for putting us on this path. And I guess from our point of view, we're working on behalf of clients, but this could work internally, like with CRO teams speaking to other stakeholders. But how do you encourage the kind of two-way interaction that this thing probably needs in order to kind of build traction, and ultimately you want people coming to this
Yeah.
kind of off their own back, right? You want them ask, like we've said, you ask me about the learning library. You want to encourage that collaboration across the board with it. Like, how have you found? You mentioned a couple of things there. Bringing it up in meetings, sending it as follow-ups. Have you got any other kind of examples where you've managed to get people excited about it?
It's getting there. It's definitely one of those things it's not the easiest sell, right? Like we know it's what they need. We know it's generating value through the stats we've talked about in this, but it's still just another thing for people to look at. And I'm trying to get it to a place where it's not just something that we use for better analyses, better iterations, that it's something that is spread across the business. We've seen a couple times where one of the guys that we work with is in marketing, and he's taken the learnings we've gotten from tests and put them into email campaigns, which has been
Mm,
interesting. So, like, based off what we've learned about Trustpilot was a big thing we did. So everyone's seen that. It's the star rating that's on a lot of people's homepage. We ran that and didn't see any lift. Like, we ran 5 tests, didn't see anything. And having those learnings available, he was able to see, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't include this in email. Maybe we should think about like other ways to leverage email. But as far as like getting people to actively engage with it, it's tough. It's tough to get a lot of engagement with CRO. I think that's why we see so many talks about how to build a culture of experimentation. It's because it's not easy. And
yeah,
this is like hard mode almost, like to get people to do this part of it. Like getting people to run a test is hard to begin with. But I think a lot of the responsibility is on you. Like we need to leverage this learning library. We need to put it in our weekly slides. We need to include it when we intake test, like, hey, reminder, your intake or the test you submitted last week, here's 5 learnings that are related to it. So you have to do the work for them. And I don't know if that's because we're in we're both working for agencies or consultancies, like that we by nature, a lot of people we work with, they want to be served, which
yeah.
fine by me. But maybe in house it's easier to kind of like get buy into this. But yeah, it's been difficult.
Um, it might be good just to kind of segue on and just maybe touch on some of these other kind of tools and sites that are popping up, and some have been around for a while. You've got all of these different types of repositories. As far as I can see, a lot of them are based on that other dirty word, best practice. And I guess the what I wanted to touch on next was where they're looking at maybe industries as a whole and saying, you can segment down your mobile designs by manufacturing or by e-commerce, and then maybe have a look through what other people are testing. That's it's good. It's a good thing to kind of get the ball rolling, get some
Yeah.
maybe some idea, another business term, um, get some ideation sessions moving, that kind of thing. But with this learning library, is there an opportunity here to, and maybe more for the consultancy side and agency side of things, is there an opportunity for kind of macro learnings across multiple different accounts and different clients and different industries?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there, so hopefully I don't forget it all, but there's a
Sorry,
lot of cool tools
we
out
can
there.
break
Like,
it down.
those are all great for helping you come up with ideas that are more, there's a good chance, or there's been shown there's a good chance that that will work in certain industries. Um, Another thing that people do to try and give you ideas that will be a good idea for your industry or just in general, you'll see those LinkedIn posts where people are like, comment, please send me the PDF below
Oh,
and I'll send you all the ideas. And it's
I
like,
can hate
okay.
those.
But yeah, those are really interesting areas for ideas for starting out your research. Good way to see like what people are doing and like things you could apply to problems you're seeing. You want to make sure they're kind of like synonymous. The problem and the treatment you're finding are aligned. But kind of what you're asking too, Nick, and is more of when you start to take these learning libraries and make them even broader, what kind of can you get out of that, and like what does it look like? We've taken the time to make a repository of all our clients and all of their tests and all of their learnings, and we start to see this really interesting view of what works and what doesn't work in our company. And that can be really interesting learning too. It's like if we're seeing um, at our company that our lowest win rate is heat map and session replay, then maybe that tells us like we need to work on, take courses in like trying to use those better. It's really interesting to start to see stuff like that, and maybe we see that, you know, the type of clients that see the best improvements are the ones that are engaging with us on a weekly basis, that sort of thing. But there was just so much in your question I thought was really good. Was there anything else that I kind of missed there?
No, I think yeah, the main point there is I guess around macro learnings and how that applies. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, for a consultancy or for an agency, learning what you're maybe not doing well is a massive win. And you know, you start training teams up in those ways. So that's really interesting. I think in terms of other resources that are out there, is this the kind of thing really where, you know, you've given us each field that needs to exist in this spreadsheet, Airtable, whatever it is there anything that we can, any tools out there that you prefer to use, or is your stuff all in an Excel spreadsheet?
Everything was in an Excel spreadsheet before I started to get annoyed with how learnings were being used. But yeah, everything right now, our most effective uses have been in Airtable. So go to Airtable. The course is on Udemy with Ruben DeVore. He'll get you all set up with how to set up this amazing Airtable. But the thing to think about while you're taking this course is like, how am I actually going to retrieve this information? You want to customize it to your needs. If you don't want to use tech that's new to you, you still can use Excel if you want to, or Google Sheets. Just make sure that the columns you're using are columns that you love, that are actually digestible. Do the work of trying to make that speculative, broader learning. Do the work of putting that specific learning in there as well. Link to slides that are not a hot mess, like slides that have metrics that are like cleaned up and the insights are easy to understand. But that would be kind of my top resources for this specific use case. Really, a lot of this is just kind of on you to take this approach and start to try and use it a little bit better, and try and like fight back a little bit against that quick win feeling, and try and think a little bit deeper. Like, it is hard. I think that's the reason this all is coming up again, is like it's hard to think about learnings. It's difficult. It's not going to be something that you just see the percent lift. It's You're going to have to figure out the tool that works for you, which there were a few we just mentioned, and then really do the work of getting this to like work for you.
And is there a particular point in time where you think now's the time to start building this, or is it literally from day one, from test one, get it documented and just start doing it and adjust from there?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to say that this is something you should start up right away. I think it's the way that I do things best, and that's just my experience, is when I really feel the pressure for like, hey, this system is not working anymore. Then you get that fire in you, and you're like, I need to create this thing that's going to help me do my job better. And then you have motivation to do it. It's so easy to say, just start doing it from the start when you have no motivation and you don't really know what you're doing. You're just starting out a program. But I mean, I would say like once you're running, and volume is like not very good to even talk about, but like if you're running more than 3, 4 tests a month, like you should start putting them somewhere. But yeah, if you're just running one test a month or something, maybe you don't need something like this. But I think that once you scale up and mature, it's going to be something that's really useful. And you really do need somewhere to show like your progress and what you've actually done, or someone from executive leadership is going to be like, hey, what are you paying these people to do? And then you're going to have to go through a million PowerPoints and try and find out what the heck you've done. But if you do this up front, you've got the work done for you already. So that's one easy motivation point for doing it from the start.
Yeah, for sure. So, we've touched on loads there. I think there's lots for people to be doing. And what I imagine is that people have maybe versions of this in their, that they're updating daily. Maybe it's more of a roadmap or a test repository or something. But I think some of the key points that you've raised today are going to maybe encourage a few people to go away and assess the documents they're keeping, me included. I might give it to someone in my team rather than me doing it, but because it sounds hard, but sounds beneficial. So I guess it'd be nice to maybe just touch on how this learning library fits in with, I guess, the way of doing business that is CRO. We're trying to encourage, as an industry and as a group, as a collective of CROs, we're kind of tired of being treated like a line item, right? We're trying to tell people and educate people about CRO, how it actually is a culture shift within a business. It's a different way of doing business. It's about experimenting, learning, growing. How do you think that this learning library can maybe fit into that ecosystem and maybe even help us to tell that story?
Yeah, exactly, Nick. So pretty much, you touched on it. Like our industry right now, they're focused on a lot of companies are focused on quick wins, driving revenue. We're kind of like pigeonholed in this spot where we're like the number go up wizard. Like we've got to do this thing quickly. But I think most people that really know this know that we're trying to make CRO a whole new way of doing business. We want it to be the foundational piece, where people are just obsessed with making better decisions, and A/B testing and all the different types of testing are a big part of that. Um, and there's this whole like brewing thing of experimentation led growth, not product led growth, not sales led growth. We want to have experimentation led growth, which is amazing. But the way that we do this is by no longer being this percent up or down machine. We make our learnings understandable to all groups of people. If only people that know what statistical confidence is and power is can understand the learnings we're creating, then we're siloing ourselves, not doing ourselves any justice. So by creating this learning library, however you decide to create it, you are doing the work of making the learnings broad so anyone can understand them, making them specific so they can get a little more details, and making your decks and your analyses to the point where people can really see the value being created.
Amazing. So we have tried to use our words to help people visualize what this thing looks like, but conscious that we haven't brought anything up on screen, which is kind of on purpose. We wanted to have a chat today, not just share another presentation.
Yeah.
But you mentioned to me before you have written a presentation called Test to Learn, Learn to Win, which we're going to try and put in the description. So there should be a link to that in there, and that includes not only kind of ways of doing CRO, but also some examples of what this learning library might look like, right? Just to give people a few prompts to get going.
Yeah. No, I think we'll link that deck, and it'll really give you a good idea of how you can show the value of experimentation too. And then it'll show you a pretty pragmatic approach to how to create this thing that we call the learning library. Can also link to maybe a few photos of just like what my learning library looks like, and make an album or something where you guys can see. But also don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested in this thing and you want to talk a little bit more about it. I love to like post about this kind of stuff. It drives me crazy when I see that learnings aren't being shouted from the rooftops, and also when learnings are being used in a dubious way, kind of drives me crazy too. So if you want to just chat about how to actually do this thing, I'd be more than happy to.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to have you. And I was trying to remember your nickname then. Nick at
Nick at
Night.
Night.
It sounds too creepy. I can't use it. No, it's great to have you on. I think there's some, even just from this podcast alone, there's some great learnings. So hopefully you'll add this to your learning library. Yeah, it's been great to have you, and thanks very much, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me on the Experimentation podcast. It's been my pleasure.
This is Romo Santiago from Experiment Nation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing.